Welcome to this video tutorial on parts of a narrative. Now, parts of a narrative are basically, it's some meta language we can use to describe the different parts of a narrative or a story or a novel, anything we can read, view. That's what I'm talking about, I guess. Sorry, as you know, my unscripted, wonderful video tutorials, you just got to love them. Now, the first part of a narrative, quite literally, is the orientation. As the word suggests, this is the start, where you generally get to know the settings and characters to establish the context of the plot. Now, context is, what we mean by context is where and when it is and what's going on before it all starts and so forth. Now, the narrative can begin in two ways. Ab ovo, which is from the start, chronologically, and work its way forward to the conclusion in order of time, or it can begin in medias res, now which is meaning in the middle of the action, then recount the earlier events through characters' dialogue, memories, flashbacks, whatever. Think to yourself, well, The Great Gatsby is one that begins in medias res, which is from the end, I guess. Any action movie where you have a massive action scene at the start, like a superhero movie, for example, big action scene, and then it shoots backwards in time to tell us how he became a superhero. I think the first Spider-Man movie does that, perhaps. Complication is what comes next, and this is kind of tied together with the turning point. These are two very similar aspects. In fact, complications are often turning points, and turning points are minor complications or further complications, so they're related. Now, a complication introduces some degree of tension, narrative tension or dramatic tension, to propel the narrative forwards, because, as I've mentioned before, if there is no narrative tension, story doesn't go forwards. All right, this means characters will be struggling with some internal challenge or conflict. All right. The reason why I mention this being internal and highlight it is because plot devices are not complications. All right. Plot devices are events that happen to the character, but they are not the complication itself. Now, when you know the definition of plot devices, which is the final thing we'll look at, that'll make a whole lot more sense to you and you'll understand it a lot better. Now, turning point is the simple way of defining it, and the difference, I guess, is a major change in narrative direction, carrying the narrative towards its climax. So, I mean, complication is very similar in this way. It's a point after which there is a subtle but significant shift in the options available to characters. All right? Options available. Now, this can be caused either by a plot device or by an internal challenge or conflict. Now, the climax is the point in the narrative where the tension is its greatest. It's a point of crisis. All right? Everything's on the line, and it's usually towards the end of a narrative. Why? Because if it was in the middle of a narrative, you would have no reason to no reason to read on. You know, you'd get past there and just go, yeah, this is getting really boring. Now, the denouement, it's a French word meaning unknotting. It's the events that immediately follow the climax, where narrative threads and conflicts and uncertainties are untangled, which sets the stage for them to be resolved. They're not being resolved yet, but everything's untangled, so it's ready to be. The resolution follows the denouement. It relaxes the narrative tension and produces a sense of closure, because, of course, all these wonderful threads and conflicts and uncertainties there are being resolved. Now, closure's one. If you're not sure what closure means, Google that. Google that mad style. Use a literary dictionary. Related terms. Plot device. I left this one till last because it's a bit confusing. People often think a plot device is kind of like a technique. A device in itself is actually, it's another word to use for a technique. A literary technique, a poetic technique, whatever. A plot device, however, is a device that kind of happens in the plot of a narrative. It's an event that happens that forces things in a certain direction. For example, an earthquake, or bad guy shoots someone's mum. All right, that's a plot device. However, this is different to a complication, because the complication would be the result of this plot device. For example, bad guy shoots James Bond's mum. The complication for James Bond is, does he maintain his professional and cavalier attitude as a spy, or does he let it rattle him to the core and he reacts in a bad way? That's a complication. Right, and that's the end of my video tutorial, I suppose. If you have any questions, feel free to email or comment. Thank you very much. Good evening. I'm James Bond.